I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to talk to you about the connections between nutrition and climate change today. I've got 5 points to make. Nutrition and climate change are really importantly connected. 2 ways on the mitigation side, 2 ways on the adaptation side, and then 1 way in a sort of a universal connection. So on the mitigation side, we know that what we grow and what we eat has a big impact on greenhouse gas emission. We know that animal source foods tend to have higher greenhouse gas emissions than plant-based foods, and we know that animal source foods, if eaten in excess, tend to be less good for your health. So reducing and switching from animal source foods to plant-based foods, if you're consuming a lot of that, is a good thing for your health, and it's a good thing for the planet's health and for greenhouse gas emissions. But that's not possible for all populations, and there are some populations in Africa and Asia and Latin America that we actually want more animal source foods to be consumed. And so we are going to have to produce animal source foods in the future. And the demand is probably going to increase, not decrease. So the second point is, for mitigation, we have to find ways of producing animal source food that have a smaller environmental footprint, especially when it comes to greenhouse gas emission. We need to decouple the production of animal source food from greenhouse gas emissions, and that's my second point. On the adaptation side of the house, obviously we know that climate change is generating droughts where there weren't droughts and floods where there weren't floods before. And on the drought side of things, we have to find plants and agriculture that is more resistant to droughts, more resilient. And on the flooding side of things, we have to find, again, crops and animals that are more resilient to excess water and excess salination. So there's a real challenge to the breeders to come up with varieties of foods that are more resilient to these new environmental stresses. Also, on the adaptation side, we know that higher greenhouse gas emissions, especially CO2 emissions, are actually going to reduce the amount of micronutrients in some key cereals and root crops, such as zinc in rice. So another response is going to be, how do we find cereals that are high in micronutrients? How do we find these so-called biofortified crops that rely on traditional breeding mechanisms to get more iron, zinc, vitamin A and vitamin D into our cereals and roots and tubers? But perhaps the most important connection between nutrition and climate is the opportunity for new alliances. There's a really strong alignment between these two communities that haven't traditionally come together. And if they can find these new alliances, if they can make them work, then we can all be working together for a food system or a set of food systems that not only produce and promote human health, but also promote planetary health. So one set of human health outcomes can coexist with one set of good planetary health outcomes. Thank you.